New Orleans. A moonless, rainy night. The storm poured onto the pavement as if the sky itself were unleashing its fury. Thunder boomed without pause, wind thrashed the trees along Highway 180, like someone was trying to rip the world apart. In the middle of that chaos, a sleek black BMW tore through the night like an arrow, its headlights slicing the rain like two desperate eyes searching for an escape. Behind the wheel was Ethan Callahan, 34 years old, CEO of one of the largest tech conglomerates in the United States. His face was cold and sharp, jaw clenched tight, and his eyes heavy with pain. The phone vibrated on the dashboard. The screen lit up Metro General Hospital. The fourth time in 30 minutes, but this time Ethan couldn't ignore it. He picked up. The doctor's voice came through urgent and direct. "Mr. Callahan, I'm sorry, your father Charles Callahan has slipped into a pre-coma state. If you want to say your last words, you have to be here within the next hour." Ethan set the phone down. His hand trembled. His father, the man who once lifted him with calloused hands and with those same hands shattered their father-son bond, like a glass cup dropped onto frozen stone. They hadn't spoken in 6 years, not since Ethan rejected the family empire, chose his own path, and walked away from a cold but demanding father. And now, the moment he meant to make things right could be his last. The rain fell harder. The wind howled through the window seams. The roads slick like oil. But Ethan pressed the gas harder. "Just wait a little longer, Dad. Just this once." He murmured it like a prayer into the void. In the very next instant, everything exploded. A deer bolted into the road. Its eyes glowed like headlights suddenly flipped on in the dark. Ethan had no time to react, or if he did, it was too late. The car skidded, flipped sideways, and plunged off the shoulder. Rain hammered the windshield like thousands of blades. Branches shattered. A deafening crack rang out as the hood slammed into an old oak tree, bearing the final moment of a man who once ruled his world but couldn't control a single twist of fate. Then, silence. The BMW lay motionless in the flooded earth, and sticky mud headlights still glowing like a wounded animal, gasping its last breath in the dark. Blood streamed from Ethan's forehead, mixing with the rain on his cheek. He closed his eyes. A single tear fell, whether from the pain or the words he never got to say to his father, no one would ever know. And if you're still reading this, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Because this isn't just a love story, it's a journey of redemption, kindness, and the quiet miracles life hides inside its heaviest storms. If you believe that sometimes a single moment can change an entire life, leave a heart, a comment, or follow the channel. Those little things are what keep us telling stories that make hearts lose sleep. And don't go just yet, because you haven't met her. The woman who stepped out from the shadows, the one who would save his life, the one who would change everything forever. In the eastern outskirts of New Orleans, near the edge of the Jean Lafitte swamp, there's a place where GPS often loses signal, and people too sometimes lose their way. The roads are dirt and red clay slick with mud. The houses are wooden and weathered with peeling paint. The people there are used to living beneath dim yellow lights, and in that place, Alana Brooks was quietly making her way through the night, her worn-out nurse shoes splashing through puddles, her nylon jacket streaked with stains from the rain. She had just finished a 12-hour shift at the local community health center, a place where staff had to take turns buying gloves and antiseptic with their own money, and where most of the patients had no insurance. Night shifts were her favorite. Fewer people, fewer questions, fewer pitying glances. When the hallway lights dimmed, Alana could breathe a little easier. Slung over her shoulder was an old olive backpack containing only a battered leather notebook, a few small medical tools, and a silver necklace wrapped in a handkerchief. The last gift her grandmother had given her before passing away exactly 1 year ago. The rain hadn't stopped. It fell thick and heavy like unspoken questions Alana had long stopped trying to answer. She pulled her hood tighter and stepped quickly through ankle-deep puddles. The walk home usually took 30 minutes, but tonight she allowed herself to slow down. Something about the night felt off, like a heartbeat out of rhythm in her chest. That's when she heard the crash, the sound of metal twisting, glass shattering. A long, high-pitched screech, then a final sound, dry, dull, and low, echoing from below the slope that led into the woods. Alana froze. The rain slapped her face like cold hands. She squinted in the direction of the noise. It wasn't her imagination. Without hesitation, she ran toward the hill, each step sinking into the mud as if fear itself were trying to hold her back. At the bottom, through storm-torn trees, she saw a car, its front end buried into the trunk of an old oak. One side crumpled headlights still blazing like wide, desperate eyes. No one else was around. No cries for help, only the steady tapping of rain on the car's hood like a dark lullaby. Alana slid down the slope, tripped over a root, and fell hard, but immediately got up. She rushed to the driver's window, the flicker of her phone's flashlight barely piercing the downpour. The man inside was unconscious. Blood ran from his temple, staining the collar of his white shirt a deep crimson. He was still breathing faintly but steadily. She didn't need to know who he was. She didn't need to know what had happened. She was a nurse, and she couldn't let a life slip away into fate's hands. With swift precision, Alana pulled a keychain from her jacket pocket, an emergency glass breaker she always carried, and shattered the window. Glass shards flew. She reached in, unlocked the door, and with every ounce of strength in her soaked, slender body, began to pull him out. He was heavier than she expected. The soaked suit clung to him like stone. But she kept going. "Come on, just a little more," she panted, dragging him through the mud. Each step was a battle against destiny. On one side, life. On the other, her own failing strength. But Alana pulled. Even as her knees bled, even as her hands trembled, even as the rain blinded her. Finally, once clear of the car, she cradled his head on her lap, checked his pulse and airway. Under the flickering light of her phone, she saw his face, clearly sharp features, pale yet carved with a kind of enduring hardship, like a real statue etched by time. She began chest compressions, tilted his head to keep his airway clear. Then she dialed 911, her hands shaking so badly she had to repeat herself twice for the dispatcher to lock in her location. When the sound of sirens finally cut through the rain, red and blaring, Alana felt her whole body give way to exhaustion. But she knew. She'd made it in time. She looked down at him one last time, the ambulance lights reflecting in her eyes. "You'll never know who I am," she whispered. "And maybe that's for the best." Then she unclasped the necklace from around her neck, the tarnished silver chain with a teardrop-shaped pendant, etched with the words, "For Grace always." She tucked it into the pocket of his suit, a fragile proof, a trace, a silent goodbye. When the paramedics arrived, she stood up quietly, backing into the trees, disappearing into the night, as if she had never been there at all. The storm still howled, but a life had been saved, and a heart, one that had turned to stone, had just been touched ever so gently for the first time. No one knew her name. No one remembered her face. But from that night on, destiny had shifted, and the story in truth had only just begun. Ethan woke up in a room washed in white. The strong smell of antiseptic, the steady beeping of vital signs like the ticking of a clock he no longer controlled. The ceiling lights were too bright, causing his just-opened eyes to reflexively shut again, as if to shield themselves. There was something heavy on his chest, not just the physical pain from his injuries, but a deep emptiness, as if he'd missed something far more important than a final goodbye to his dying father. To his left, light footsteps approached. A white nurse entered the room, checked the monitors, and softly spoke. "Mr. Callahan, you've been unconscious for nearly 2 days. You're very lucky." Ethan looked up and gave a faint shake of his head. His throat felt like sandpaper. He wanted to ask about his father, but stopped. The weight of regret was too heavy to put into words. "Did someone save me?" His voice was hoarse, each word dragged out with effort. The nurse hesitated. "When we arrived at the scene, no one was there. An unknown individual had called 911, broken the car window, pulled you out of danger, and disappeared before the ambulance arrived. If it weren't for her, you likely wouldn't be here." Ethan squinted. No one knows her name. The police searched the area but found no trace. However, she left this. The nurse reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small plastic bag. Inside was a simple, delicate silver necklace, its teardrop-shaped pendant, old and slightly tarnished. Ethan reached out with a trembling hand. His fingers brushed over the engraved words beneath the pendant, "For Grace always." What seemed like a simple phrase stirred something inside him, something he couldn't explain. Like a whisper in the rain he never fully heard. Grace always. A promise, a farewell, or perhaps a quiet reminder from the woman herself that no matter how harsh the world became, she chose kindness. He brought the necklace closer to his eyes. It wasn't expensive, not fashionable, no brand. But there was something strangely real about it, as if it had belonged to someone who had lived a quiet life, but never an invisible one. We tried to check the blood-lift fingerprints. There was nothing. That necklace was the only thing she left behind. the nurse added, closing her chart and quietly exiting the room. Ethan lay still, eyes fixed on the necklace. A strange warmth radiated from the cold metal. He no longer felt like the CEO of a billion-dollar company, no longer just the son filled with guilt for missing a final embrace with his father. He felt simply like a man who had been saved by someone he'd never met yet, whose touch had gone deeper than any connection he'd ever known. He didn't know her name, didn't know her face, didn't know where she lived. But he knew one thing: he wouldn't be able to sleep until he found the woman who put her own safety aside to save a stranger's life, because she saved him without needing thanks. And that to Ethan Callahan was the hardest thing to accept. He was used to paying back with money, returning favors with power. But this time nothing he had meant anything. Ethan closed his hand tightly around the necklace, feeling the sharp edge of the pendant press into his skin. If she wanted to vanish, then he had every reason to find her. Not to repay her, but for another reason, one he couldn't yet name. He needed to know why out of millions of faceless people it was her, and why, after that stormy night, he couldn't stop thinking about someone who had no name. 6 days later, Ethan was discharged from the hospital with only one goal: to track down the woman who wore the necklace that read, "For Grace Always." There was nothing in the hospital system, no calls from a personal number. No one came forward claiming to be his rescuer. The police closed the case as a miracle with no explanation. But Ethan didn't stop. He began with the smallest clues: maps of the crash site, traffic camera footage near the area, and visits to nearby clinics. It wasn't a covert investigation, it was a quiet mission. One that began with a life debt and might end with something he didn't yet have the words for. Ethan didn't know who he was looking for, only that the necklace, as simple as a memory, had become his compass, a guide for a man who had never believed in fate. And somewhere far away, the woman still lived quietly, humbly, in a small wooden house with 3 children born on the same day, whom Ethan didn't know he was about to meet. October in New Orleans always carried a quiet kind of sky. The rain no longer came in heavy summer downpours, but the dampness still seeped into the soul like a sadness no one dared name. On the small wooden porch behind the suburban community clinic, Alana Brooks stood motionless, staring down at her phone. One text message glowed on the screen: "She's gone. 3:42 a.m. She didn't get to hear your voice one last time." Her hand trembled slightly, finger hovering just above the words as if one more touch might soften the truth. But the message stayed cold and stark, like death itself. A single drop fell. No one could tell if it came from the leaky porch roof or from Alana's delicate lashes. She clasped her hands tightly together, as if she could keep the crack in her heart from spreading further. Her grandmother had been the last person on earth who still called her baby girl, even though she was now 31. The one who raised her with lullabies instead of lectures and cups of tea instead of stern rules. The one who once told her, "Kindness isn't weakness, it's the hardest choice the strong ever make." And now the only person who still believed she was soft enough to love was gone. Alana closed the phone, slipped it into her nurse's coat pocket, took a deep breath, and stepped back into the clinic. No one would know she had just received a call that shifted the course of her life, because for the poor, grief always comes after the shift ends. Meanwhile, downtown on the 29th floor of a glass tower housing Callahan Strategic Holdings, Ethan sat through a board meeting he wasn't really in, at least not in spirit. Partners, lawyers, shareholders, all were speaking, but their voices came through like distant echoes. Ethan gazed through the glass wall at the city, but what he saw wasn't the glittering skyline of New Orleans. It was that rain-soaked road and the faceless woman who disappeared without a trace. "The board is waiting for your signature," said Robert, his assistant, with careful formality. Ethan didn't turn. "I'll sign, just not today." The room fell silent. Since the accident, Ethan hadn't been the same. No more 5-minute meetings. No more sharp looks that made subordinates shrink. Now he often stared off into space, often fell silent mid-sentence, often disappeared from the office without a word. And most noticeably, he always carried that necklace. Every morning he held it turned over, the pendant, etched with "For Grace Always," then wrapped it around his wrist like a strange ritual. It didn't match his tailored suits, didn't suit the image of a cold Wall Street CEO, but he didn't care. The only thing that made him feel alive was the belief that someone out there had once risked everything for him and asked for nothing in return. Ethan had hired a private investigation team. They combed through every camera, hospital, and health clinic within a 10-mile radius of the crash site. The results, no matches to the description. No one claimed the necklace. No night shift medical worker reported anything unusual. It was as if she had never existed. And that more than anything was what trapped him. Ethan used to believe in control over projects, over people, over emotion. But now, he couldn't control the way his heart skipped every time he imagined a pair of eyes he'd never even seen. He couldn't summon her with money or power because she had chosen to disappear. And not being able to control that was driving him mad. Alana arrived at the funeral home 2 hours late wearing an old black dress pressed from one her mother once wore. No one asked why she didn't cry much, because everyone knew the deepest grief is the kind that cannot be cried out. She looked at the photo of her grandmother. That gentle face had carried her through winters without power, had soothed her through nightmares born from abandonment. But now within that polished oak frame, she felt miles away, cold. After the service, Alana quietly returned to the small house near the edge of the swamp, where 3 children waited for her. Triplets, 2 girls and a boy, whom she had adopted when their homeless birth mother, one of her patients, died after a workplace accident. No one else had wanted to take in all 3, but Alana did. Even knowing it meant giving up her dream of studying abroad. Even knowing it meant saying no to ever remarrying. Grace, Faith, and Elijah, she whispered, placing 3 tiny toys on the dinner table. Grandma will always watch over you, just like Mommy still watches over the man she saved, but never saw again. In that moment, as moonlight spilled through the window and cast a silver glow on 3 sleeping faces, Alana understood she was no longer a woman alone. She was the whole world to these 3 tiny souls. And even as her heart bled with loss, she would stand tall, because she had already walked through the dark and knew how to keep the flame inside her from ever going out. On the other side of the city, Ethan stood alone on the Crescent City Connection Bridge, staring down at the churning Mississippi River. He still held the necklace. This was the 300th time he had turned it over, searching for a mark, a scratch, a clue, even though he already knew there was none. But he wouldn't give up, because if she had risked her life for a stranger, then he would cross the ends of the earth to find her, the woman who made his heart beat for once, not from logic, but from longing. What he didn't know was that just under 4 miles away in a small wooden house near the woods, that same woman was looking up at the same night sky, with 3 sleeping children and a heart both broken and brave. The wooden house on the edge of the western New Orleans swamp had no doorbell, no nameplate. Only a moss-covered path led to it, as if the place existed in a world entirely separate from the city, quiet, secluded, and patient, like the woman who lived inside. Alana Brooks was tidying up toys scattered across the wooden floor when the sound of Elijah's cry, the youngest of the triplets, came from the bedroom. Just one sound, and she knew it was a hunger cry, not one of fear. She no longer needed alarms or feeding charts. The rhythms, the breaths, the expressions of the 3 children had become part of her, like a second body. She stepped into the room and gently lifted Elijah from the crib. "Shh, Mommy's here," she whispered as naturally as breathing. "Mommy," that word wasn't on any birth certificate. No legal bond, no judgment ever ordered her to bear this responsibility. But Alana chose it one cold afternoon at the shelter when 3 newborns lay quietly in incubators, ignored by everyone else. They had asked her, "Are you sure you alone with 3?" She simply nodded. "I won't let them be separated. They're a family. I can't let them be torn apart." No one said more, because that answer didn't come from logic. It came from the deepest place in her heart. Motherhood had never been Alana's dream. She once hoped to pursue a career in public health research, had even earned a partial scholarship to Michigan. She imagined herself working with international organizations. But one day she encountered a Black woman, frail, coughing up blood, trembling on a sidewalk, with a belly ready to burst. The woman said little, but her eyes pleaded, "Help my baby, even if I don't make it." Alana brought her to the clinic and cared for her until labor. The triplets were born fragile, pale, with erratic heartbeats. Their mother passed away the very next day. No relatives, no address, no one came. And Alana, the only one still present in that delivery room after everyone had gone, held each baby in her arms, trembling but steady, and gave them names. Grace for the gentleness she had always longed for in life. Faith for the belief in doing right even without reward. Elijah for hope, even the faintest flicker. The first 4 months were like drowning in a whirlpool. 3 feeding schedules, 3 sleep rhythms, 3 different temperatures, and 3 types of cries no one had ever taught her to decipher. She hadn't slept a full hour straight. She couldn't remember the last time she looked in a mirror. There were nights she sat with all three babies pressed to her chest back against the wall, tears falling on their cheeks faster than she could wipe them. Not from regret, but because her body was too weak, too exhausted, and her soul carried too much love and loneliness. But every morning when three tiny pairs of eyes looked at her, as if she was the entire world, she would remind herself, "No one forced me into this. I chose this. And if I have even 1 ounce of strength left, I'd choose it again." The years that followed didn't get easier. She had to give up her permanent job at the hospital and switch to home nursing, more flexible but unstable. On nights she came home late, she left the children with old Mrs. Louisa, a Cuban-American woman living alone next door, in exchange for helping her with groceries, cooking, and weekly errands. Preschool tuition out of reach. Instead, Alana created a little learning corner at home, cutting colored paper drawing letters, teaching each one how to read on her own. No aides, no specialists. She worked while they slept. She ate only after they'd eaten. She read books with one child in her lap and another on each arm. And whenever someone asked, "Why do you sacrifice so much?" she simply smiled. Because it wasn't a sacrifice. It was the one thing that kept her alive after all she had lost, the power to choose love her way. One afternoon, Elijah asked Mommy, "Do we have a dad?" Alana froze. She hadn't prepared for that question. Looking into her child's clear eyes, she gently replied, "Yes, sweetheart, you do. He's just not here right now. But if he knew how amazing you are, I'm sure he'd be very proud." Elijah nodded as if he understood. But as he ran off, he whispered, "I'll find him, so he can see how beautiful Mommy is." Alana chuckled, but something clenched inside her chest. She hadn't told them that their father was an empty space. She didn't want them growing up feeling like they had been abandoned. Because they hadn't been. She had pulled them into her arms. And she had no regrets about that choice. Even on the nights when all three were sound asleep, and she sat alone on the wooden porch, listening to the hum of insects and wondering if anyone anywhere still remembered her, if the man she had saved pulled from a burning car in the middle of a rainstorm was still alive. Did he ever think of her? Had he seen the necklace she left behind and understood that? Sometimes kindness doesn't ask to be repaid. She hoped for nothing. She only wished that if he was alive, he was living with decency. As for her, she would continue her path, the journey of being mother to three children. A choice without retreat, without a map, without an exit. But also the only choice that made her heart feel at peace in a world that had once turned its back on her. In towns like Lafitte, a tiny settlement of fewer than 2,000 residents on the edge of Louisiana's swampland, stories travel faster than wind and spread farther than radio waves. People don't live by news. They live by rumor, and in such places, truth is like white cloth, easily stained by just a few drops of doubt. Ilana Brooks knew that. She'd lived in this town for over 4 years, long enough to recognize the half-curious, half-judging glances of housewives gathered at the church steps, the cold nods at the gas station, and the hollow smiles from the pharmacy clerk when she bought milk for the three little ones. She never explained. Because she knew to those used to peering through windows and drawing conclusions, the truth only made them believe she was better at hiding something. That morning, the town lay quiet under soft golden sunlight, falling on tin rooftops. Alana brought the triplets to the weekend market, a place she always kept conversation minimal, but couldn't avoid since it offered the most affordable fresh produce. She was picking okra while telling Elijah not to run from the stall when she heard the whispers behind her. "That's her. The one with the 3 kids and no one knows who the father is. Used to be a nurse in Baton Rouge. Heard she got fired for stealing meds. Something's gotta be wrong if she ain't got a husband and popped out triplets, right?" Alana froze. She didn't turn. She didn't defend herself. But her arm instinctively pulled Elijah closer, a silent shield. The air thickened. Those whispers spoken from behind rang louder in her ears than any shout. She didn't need to hear more. She'd heard enough over the years. The cost of raising 3 children alone wasn't just financial or physical. It was enduring the suspicion of a tight-knit town where anything that didn't fit their mold was seen as a threat. A black woman, no husband, no known family, living in an old wooden house, not showing up at church every Sunday, and raising 3 mixed-race white children. She was like a stain on an otherwise spotless tablecloth, and people hated stains. By the time Alana left the market, the sky had turned gray. A breeze picked up thick with the scent of coming rain. But heavier than the clouds were the glances of those who used to smile and now turned away, and the unspoken questions hanging behind every closed door. Back home, she set the grocery basket on the table, carefully washed each child's hands, and began preparing lunch like any other day. But Elijah looked up at her, concern in his eyes. "Mommy, why are you sad?" She paused, didn't answer right away, then knelt down and cupped his cheek. "Mommy's just a little tired, but seeing you three makes me feel better." It was true, but it wasn't the whole truth, because that exhaustion didn't come from her body, but from a soul too used to being judged without a chance to explain. That night, after the kids had fallen asleep, Alana sat alone on the porch holding a cup of cold ginger tea. Outside, rain began tapping softly on the old roof, a rhythm as familiar as heartache. She thought about the woman who once warned her, "You're a good person, but no one will believe a good person chooses to raise someone else's kids. They'll think you're hiding something." And they were right. She had never stolen medicine, never been fired. And those three weren't her biological children, but they also weren't not hers. They were her life now, the thread that tied her back to the world after losing everything. But in the mouths of gossipers, truth has no place. They didn't want facts. They wanted a narrative that made them feel righteous, even if it meant fabricating a shadowy past for someone else. Ilana Rose walked back inside and stepped into the children's room. All three were asleep under the soft yellow light. Each wore a different expression: Elijah, with a furrowed brow like he was dreaming something serious. Grace breathing gently, clutching her stuffed animal. Faith curled up like a tiny kitten. Alana smiled. She tucked the blanket around each one, then whispered, "As long as I have you, no rumor in the world will ever define who I am." But elsewhere, in a small hotel room in downtown New Orleans, Ethan Callahan was holding a stack of printed newspaper clippings, investigative notes, and a rumor spreading from a tiny town about a black woman unmarried, living off the grid with triplets. His heart tightened, because he knew it was that very rumor that had finally brought him this close to the woman he'd been searching for. But was he ready to face a truth that had been twisted? Or would he too become just another piece of the judgment she'd spent years trying to survive? The sun sank slowly behind the swamps of Lafitte, painting the dirt road leading into town with a golden shimmer that seemed to dissolve into the humid air. Ethan Callahan sat behind the wheel of an old silver rental. His gaze no longer held the polished confidence of a Wall Street-hardened CEO, but instead the searching look of a man chasing invisible fragments, guided by a strange, unnameable feeling. For the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing profit, wasn't chasing reputation. He was chasing a person, someone who had appeared like a miracle during the darkest hour of his life, and then vanished, leaving behind only a silver necklace and a mark so deep it had never faded. And now, after more than 2 months of asking questions, collecting scraps of information from gas stations, pharmacies, and weathered bulletin boards littered with real estate ads, he stood before a wooden house tucked into the reeds the place whispered about, in rumors tied to a mysterious woman raising 3 triplets alone. Ethan wasn't sure what waited behind that door. He only knew his heart was beating faster than it should. Not the sharp edge of corporate anxiety, not the rush of adrenaline before a billion-dollar meeting, but something more raw, almost fragile. Inside the house, Alana was cooling porridge for Faith, the youngest, who had a mild fever. She was still wearing her old white nurse uniform, frayed at the hem, fresh off a night shift at the clinic. She looked up as she heard a car approaching, her brow instinctively furrowing. She rarely had visitors. Neighbors kept to themselves. The mailman left things in the wooden box by the gate, so the unfamiliar engine at dusk felt like an intrusion. She gently set the bowl down and motioned for Elijah and Grace to stay quiet. The car door clicked. Then footsteps pressed into the damp earth outside, unhurried, heavy. When the wooden door creaked open, Alana froze. Standing there was the man she never thought she'd see again, the one she'd pulled back from the brink of death during a stormy night, only to disappear without a trace. Ethan Callahan. No expensive suit, no commanding Wall Street presence. Just a plain shirt, shoes, dusted with mud, and a thinner face, his eyes set deep but unmistakable. "I'm sorry, I don't know who told you where I live," Alana said, voice dry. "No one did," Ethan replied, his eyes fixed on her, like he was afraid if he blinked, she'd vanish again. "I found it like following footprints in fog." She started to close the door, but he rested his hand gently on the edge. Not forceful, not demanding, just a silent gesture asking for one more minute. "I didn't come to ask for gratitude. I came because I can't live with the question why." Alana took a breath. She wasn't angry, wasn't surprised. She knew a man like him with those eyes wouldn't let go so easily. I only did what any decent human would do. But not everyone breaks a car window to save a stranger and disappears into the night without waiting for thanks. Because I didn't need thanks. The words landed like armor, a final shield. But Ethan didn't retreat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the worn necklace for Grace always and held it out to her. Ilana paused. Her dark eyes flickered with something recognition hesitation, then settled back into calm. So, you kept it. It was the only thing that led me here. And now that you've found me, what do you want? Ethan looked at her for a long moment. He didn't answer right away. I don't know. I just know I can't go back to the life I had not after knowing someone like you exists. Silence stretched between them. Rain began to tap the roof. Inside, the faint sound of children's laughter drifted, then faded. Alana tilted her head, her voice soft but sharp. You shouldn't be here. You belong to a different world. I'm just a woman trying to make it through the day. Ethan said nothing. He placed the necklace gently on the doorstep, then turned to leave. Maybe you don't need me, but I needed to know you were okay. That's why I came. Alana didn't call him back, but when the door clicked shut behind her, her hand trembled. She sat down on the step and picked up the necklace like picking up a memory she thought had been buried forever in that stormy night. As for Ethan walking back to the car, he didn't feel lighter as he'd hoped. Seeing her hadn't brought closure. If anything, it made everything harder to breathe. Because now he hadn't just found the woman who saved his life. He had seen her and the 3 children. 3 tiny faces, with eyes far too familiar. And he knew everything. He thought he understood about the world, about himself, about what's possible and what isn't. Had just changed. Forever. The hum of the air conditioner echoed in the quiet of the small swamp town supermarket. It was an ordinary midweek morning in Lafitte, a place where everyone knew each other's names. Checkout lines never stretched long, and fluorescent lights cast soft shadows on the faded tiled floors. Alana pushed her worn-out shopping cart, which held 2 cartons of milk for Faith, a few rolls of toilet paper, a wilted head of lettuce, and 1 can of discounted soup. Dark circles lined her eyes. The sleeves of her long shirt hid the ink stains from her overnight shift at the local clinic. She kept her head down, spoke to no one, and silently moved through the aisles, aisle by aisle. But fate sometimes needs only a small turn or the wrong angle of a grocery cart. As she turned the corner into the dairy aisle, her cart gently bumped into another coming from the opposite direction. It wasn't a hard collision, but it was enough for the 2 milk cartons to fall and roll across the floor. Sorry, she said instinctively, bending down to pick them up, and then froze at the sound of a familiar voice. No, I'm the one who should apologize. Ethan. He also knelt, reaching for the milk carton just as she did. Their hands touched. The cold of the plastic wasn't as startling as the memories that rushed back. Alana looked up. Seeing him here, not at her door, not in the silence of night, but in broad daylight under sterile supermarket lights, caught her completely unprepared. Ethan wore a gray sweater holding a bottle of water and a box of granola. He looked misplaced in this setting, as if someone had cut him out of a glossy New York magazine and dropped him into the raw texture of Lafitte. What are you doing here? She asked, unable to hide the edge in her voice. Ethan stood, exhaling softly as if choosing his words with care. I needed milk, and maybe I was hoping to see you. Just maybe. She wasn't sure whether to laugh or walk away. This town's so small we can't really avoid each other forever, can we? She said, returning the carton to her cart. Or maybe the universe doesn't want us to, Ethan replied, gentle but not joking. They stood side by side in front of the milk fridge, silent for a long moment, like 2 strangers trapped in a pause without a clear exit. Neither spoke. Neither moved. Then a child's voice rang out. Mom, Elijah said I cheated at Lego. The sound came from the end of the aisle. Both of them turned at once. Alana didn't need to see to know who it was. But Ethan stood frozen. 3 small children, 1 boy, 2 girls. Same age, same reddish-brown hair, same storm gray eyes, a rare eye color in the deep south, but achingly familiar to Ethan every time he looked in a mirror. He couldn't move, as if the air had been pulled from his lungs. This wasn't speculation anymore. This was confirmation, a wordless truth clear enough to touch. Ilana noticed his expression. She gently placed a hand on his arm. Not angry, not denying, just a gesture, worn and tired. Not here, not now, she whispered. Ethan didn't nod, but he didn't protest either. He watched as she walked toward the children, wiping candy off a little girl's cheek, adjusting the jacket on the boy. then guiding all three toward the checkout line like her whole world existed within that tiny cart, and everything outside it simply didn't matter. He stood there for a while, one hand still holding the water, the other gripping the cart's handle tightly, his heart tangled. Not because the children might be his, but because of her eyes that asked for no help. No pity yet didn't shut him out either. Eyes that had endured too many nights of silent crying, too many dawns witnessed by no one, and too many choices made with no one's approval. That afternoon it rained. Ethan stood in the small motel room near the canal listening to raindrops patter on the tin roof like the ticking of memories. He stared at an old photograph in his wallet, a still frame clipped from a hospital footage. After he'd regained consciousness, a woman in a nurse's uniform, her face turned to the side, a white cloth in her hand. He used to think she was just his savior, but now she was so much more. He remembered the children's eyes. He remembered her voice as she whispered, "Not now." And he understood some truths need time. Some words are spoken only in silence, and some tears don't have to fall to make a heart feel soaked. Ethan didn't know what tomorrow held, but he knew that today, he was no longer the same man. Not because he had found her, but because he had seen himself in the eyes of three children. Lakeview Park in late autumn was nearly empty. Golden maple leaves drifted down over the stone paths, forming a soft carpet like a lullaby from a fading season. The wind skimmed the lake's surface, pushing along a few stray paper boats, while the shimmering water reflected the ash-gray sky, the same shade as the eyes of the man sitting on a wooden bench, watching the playground slide in the distance. Ethan had arrived an hour early. He didn't want to be late, and he didn't want her to be the one waiting. Every second of waiting today felt like perching on the edge of a cliff, staring down into the unknown love responsibility, and the years that had slipped away like rain, trailing down a window pane. Light footsteps rustled behind him. He didn't need to turn to know it was her. Alana stood there wearing a long chestnut sweater. Her lightly curled hair was pinned at the nape of her neck. Faint shadows lingered beneath her eyes, the mark of an overnight shift, or perhaps of too many quiet worries. They didn't speak at first. They simply walked together down a short stone stairway behind the playground, a hidden corner where private conversations could vanish into the breeze and be carried off by rustling trees. Ethan broke the silence, his voice low, no longer sharp like the man who once dictated press releases to boardrooms. "You can say anything. I didn't come here to judge." Alana stared at her hands. The calluses on her fingers were silent testimonies of diaper changes, frantic phone calls to doctors, and clinic shifts that lasted until dawn. "Do you remember that night?" the storm she asked, eyes still downcast. Ethan nodded. "I remember everything. The glass shattering, the smell of blood, and your voice calling me sir, like we'd known each other forever." She smiled, not quite from joy, perhaps, not even from sadness, but somewhere between. "I didn't plan to save a stranger that night, but when I saw your car crash into the water, I couldn't think. I just ran. I thought, if I was even a second too late, you'd die. And then you disappeared," he said softly. "Because I didn't think I had the right to stay." The words landed like a raindrop too heavy to hold. Ethan leaned slightly, his gaze drifting to her wrist, the place where the hospital bracelet had once been the one he still kept. "Alana, the children, are they mine?" She didn't flinch, but she didn't answer right away. "I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after that night. When I returned to the hospital, they said you'd been transferred back to New York. No one would give me an address. And I was in my final year of nursing school, alone, no family, no one to ask for advice. And you decided to raise them alone. Not because I was strong, but because I had no other choice." The breeze blew softly, brushing dry leaves into her hair. Ethan reached to remove one, then paused. The space between them shortened, but the silence stretched wider than ever. "Did you ever think of finding me?" he asked. "I did," she said. "On nights when I didn't sleep at all, when all three had fevers, when I didn't have enough money for formula and had to dilute it with warm water. I started writing a letter, but I tore it up." "Why?" "Because I was afraid. Afraid that if you came back, I wouldn't recognize myself anymore. Afraid you'd take the kids. Afraid you'd come back out of obligation, not love." This time Ethan reached for the leaf in her hair and gently pulled it free. His eyes softened like he was listening to a very old song. "And what if I told you I came back for all of it, the children, you and me?" Alana looked up. Her eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. She'd long learned to cry on the inside. Ethan, I don't need a savior. I just need someone who won't leave us again. That wasn't a plea, it was an invitation. An invitation for Ethan to step into an imperfect world, one without wealth or polished floors, but with 3 children waiting for a father and a woman who still hadn't stopped hoping. He took her hand for the first time, not like holding a rescuer's hand, but like reclaiming a part of himself. Beneath the park stairs where golden leaves fell like a soft, whispering rain, 2 people, after years of silence, choices, and losses, finally said the things they'd never told anyone. Not with words, but with presence, and with a shared truth. That in a world full of unexpected turns, sometimes the greatest miracle is that someone chose to come back. That day began as a flicker of light in a string of dark days. Ethan had invited Alana and the 3 children to the cabin he was temporarily renting by the lake. A quiet place scented with pine and gardenia, with a small dining table set by the window, where the afternoon sunlight cast soft beams across the children's hair. Faith curled up on Ethan's lap, her tiny fingers absent-mindedly playing with the collar of his shirt. Elijah rummaged through the kitchen cabinets, hunting for cereal as if he'd always lived there. And Eden, the quiet one, sat sketching circles in her mother's notebook, occasionally sneaking glances at the man she only knew as Mr. Dinner was simple: chicken soup, toasted bread, and lemonade. But no one talked about the menu. They spoke of memories of how the kids had learned their first letters of the day. Alana walked them into preschool for the first time with trembling hands. Ethan laughed for the first time in years, a real unforced laugh. It almost felt like something was taking shape. Almost. But fate rarely allows peace to linger for long. 2 days later, a black SUV pulled up outside the clinic where Alana worked. A woman stepped out, blonde hair, pulled tight heels, striking the pavement like gavels of judgment. Her name was Cassandra Walker, Ethan's former fiancée, once dubbed by the media as a symphony of beauty and power, and she wasn't there for a checkup. Alana had just finished her shift. She stepped out in her white blouse, still scented faintly of antiseptic, only to be intercepted on the walkway. Alana Brooks, Cassandra's voice was cold as frost. Yes, and you are. Attorney Cassandra Walker. I'm here as the legal representative of Mr. Ethan R. Grant's estate. A few nurses peeked out through the windows. The air seemed to freeze. Alana stood tall, not moving back an inch. I'm not interested in anyone's estate. Then maybe you're interested in the 3 children, Cassandra said, tilting her head. Do you have any legal documentation proving custody? The question sliced deep. Alana knew that legally everything she had done was solo. No birth certificates listing a father, no custody agreement, nothing but love, and love unfortunately wasn't enough in court. I've raised them since birth, she replied, her voice calm but firm. I cared for them through fevers, teething night terrors. I don't need paperwork to prove I'm their mother. Cassandra smirked. Not to me, but to the legal system. And I assure you, once we file for DNA testing, things will become very clear. She handed over an envelope. I suggest you prepare yourself. Ethan will be seeking custody of the children, even if it means going to court. That night, Alana's small home was no longer peaceful. The kids had gone to sleep, but she hadn't. She sat by the window watching soft rain fall against the awning. In her hands was Cassandra's envelope, unopened, but as heavy as a stone pressed to her chest. Part of her wanted to run, like she had years ago. Pack a bag, gather the children, head somewhere far across the map. But this time was different. Not just because of Ethan, but because she was tired. Tired of running. Tired of always having to prove she deserved the one thing she cherished most, her children. A knock at the door, gentle but resolute. It was Ethan. She didn't ask how he knew. Perhaps because a father's heart shares an invisible thread with the unease of his children and their mother. He wasn't wearing a suit. No lawyer, no documents. Just tired eyes and a rain-damp umbrella. Cassandra came, she said quietly. He nodded. I know, I told her to stop, but she's never been good at losing. He sat across from her at the small table where rushed breakfast once happened. I'm not going to sue you, Alana, I swear. But if she files on your behalf, claiming it's to protect your legal interests, I'll refuse. I'll speak out. I'll do whatever it takes. She looked at him long and searching. I've told my children that no one can take them from me unless I stop fighting for them. You're not going to make me break that promise, are you? Ethan was silent. Then his voice dropped. I don't want to take them from you. I just want to be part of their lives. It won't be that simple. I know, and I'll fight not against you, but to prove that I deserve it. Outside, the rain kept falling. But this time, there were two people inside the house who weren't alone, no longer standing on opposite sides, though the real battle was waiting outside. Late afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the clinic's window, casting golden hues on faded walls and drawing a silhouette across the old tiled floor. Alana was bandaging a young boy's scraped knee after a bike accident when her phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. Ilana Brooks. A woman's voice answered raspy but surprisingly gentle. This is Alana. Who's calling? There was hesitation on the other end. Then softly, May Whitmore. I'm your mother's mother. The world paused for a beat. May Whitmore, a name buried beneath layers of dust and memory. A name Alana had avoided speaking for years. When Alana was 19 after the sudden death of her mother, the only family she had ever known, she and May had a bitter falling out. May, a retired school teacher, known for her sternness and rigid principles, couldn't accept her granddaughter dropping out of med school to become a caregiver. And not just for anyone, but for a man injured in a car accident. A stranger. Loving someone who doesn't even know you is foolish, May had once shouted. And replacing your career with compassion, that's the same mistake your mother made, and she paid dearly for it. That night, Alana left, with nothing but a single suitcase and a photo of her mother. They hadn't spoken since. Until today. They met at a small tea shop where old jazz records played softly and the air smelled of warm cinnamon. May looked much older, dark circles under her eyes, hands trembling as she lifted her cup of tea. But she was still herself, sitting upright in a collared shirt, eyes scanning Alana's face like she was reading the years she had missed. I know about the children, May began, her voice no longer sharp but weathered. And I know about Ethan Grant. I follow the news. I know how hard you've fought to protect those three souls. Alana didn't respond. She quietly stirred her coffee, eyes lowered. I shouldn't have tried to control everything. But back then when your mother died, I was scared. Scared of losing you too. The same way I lost her by not listening. May slid an old leather envelope across the table. I've kept this for a long time. I think it's time you had it. Inside was her mother's handwritten journal, faded pages, trembling ink, recounting the pregnancy, the loneliness of giving birth in a cheap motel, the man who abandoned them. And May, a mother once loved, once hated, but always hoped to be understood. At the end was a letter short, aching. Mama, if one day I'm no longer here, please love Alana the way I couldn't. And don't make her choose between her heart and her head, because I know she'll always choose love. A single tear landed on the page, silently. Alana folded the letter, resting her hand gently on May's. No words were needed. A few days later at the attorney's office, May returned, this time as a witness. Her face was resolute, but her eyes carried a warmth none of them expected. To the surprise of Ethan, Cassandra's lawyer, and the court officer present, May produced a file folder, hospital photos, birth records of the triplets, voluntary guardianship papers, even the children's early immunization records that she herself had submitted 5 years ago, back when Alana didn't yet have the legal ability to sign them herself. My granddaughter may not have official birth certificates for these children, May said clearly, but she has evidence and the truth. These children may be the blood of Ethan Grant, but they are the soul of Alana Brooks. Silence fell over the room. Ethan looked at Alana seated beside her grandmother. For the first time, she wasn't alone in this fight. In his eyes, admiration, sorrow, and relief. That evening, Ethan returned to Alana's porch. The children were already asleep. May was reading in the living room. And Alana, she was in the garden tending to the hydrangeas May had planted last spring. Ethan approached. He didn't touch her. Didn't speak right away. Thank you, he said softly. Alana turned. For what? For letting me witness all of this. And for not running the way I once did. For the first time, she didn't look away. They stood there among dew-covered flowers, not as strangers, not quite as lovers, but as two souls once torn apart, slowly stitching themselves together again. With truth, memory, and trust being rebuilt piece by fragile piece. The last rain of the season poured over New Orleans like the soundtrack to something no one expected. Ethan stood in front of the mirror in Alana's modest living room, buttoning a white dress shirt still sticky from the lollipop one of the kids had smeared on it earlier. The little house where Alana lived, old, cramped, worn, carried a scent of cinnamon, warm milk, and shattered dreams held back together. And somehow it had become the only place Ethan felt real. From the other room, the laughter of the triplets, Xavier, Lily, and Isaiah, rose like a carefree symphony. Ethan smiled softly, but in his eyes a flicker of nerves remained. not because of the children, not because of the shirt, but because of what he was about to do. That afternoon, Alana had been called in for an emergency case at the clinic. Ethan stayed home with the kids. He was used to it now. Diaper changes, bottle feeding, bedtime routines, things he couldn't even imagine doing 6 months ago, now felt oddly natural. But today he had one more task, one he had rehearsed for countless nights every time he saw Alana's eyes soften as she rocked the children to sleep. He opened the kitchen drawer where he'd hidden a small purple box. Inside a ring, not flashy, not expensive, but everything he could afford now that the name Ethan Grant, former tech billionaire, had collapsed under lawsuits from Cassandra and mass withdrawal from investors. No more company, no mansion, no private jet, only a man with 2 hands, 3 children, and a heart full of mistakes, trying to make them right. Alana returned around 7 p.m., blouse stained with blood and dirt eyes red from failing to save a patient who'd suffered a stroke. Ethan understood that feeling he'd faced loss in business. But for Alana, loss meant lives, souls. She didn't cry, but when Ethan handed her a warm mug of ginger tea, she placed a hand on her forehead and whispered, "Today I wish I didn't have to be strong." He didn't answer, just sat across from her and placed the little box on the table. "What's this?" she asked, eyes narrowing in surprise. "Not an attempt to rescue you," Ethan said quietly, his voice low and steady. "You've never needed saving, not from me, not from anyone." He paused. "And it's not to redeem myself either. No apology could erase the pain I caused." Alana said nothing. "It's a promise," he continued, "that I won't disappear again. That if you'll let me, I want to be here not just when things are easy, but when everything is messy, tired, broken, even hopeless." He opened the box. The ring sat there, not shining like diamonds, but glowing with quiet defiance, much like Ethan's eyes in that moment. "Marry me, Alana, not for the kids, not because of the past, but for now, and all the things we've never dared believe we deserve." Alana was silent for a long while. Then she looked at him, eyes like deep ocean water holding years of resilience, grief, and forgotten dreams. "Aren't you afraid?" she whispered. "Afraid of what?" "Of poverty, of 3 kids, of a woman the world once turned its back on, of a life that's too real." He smiled, stepping toward her. Then gently he knelt under the warm kitchen light. "No, I'm only afraid of losing you again." She didn't answer with words. She leaned down, pressing her lips softly to his forehead, a tender, hesitant touch like placing a quiet rest note in a symphony of broken chords. And then she nodded. A nod only someone who has walked through the dark could give, the kind that means everything. That night, no one slept. The kids, half awake and curious, tumbled into their parents' room, climbing into bed and asking why their mother kept smiling. Alana scooped Lily into her arms, glancing across the room to Ethan, who lay on the other side, arms wrapped around Isaiah and Xavier. He looked back at her and whispered, "A family. We're really a family now, aren't we?" She didn't reply aloud, but in her heart, for the first time in years, she said yes, loud and clear. Yes. Autumn mornings in New Orleans had a quiet gentleness to them, as if the city itself had learned to breathe softer after surviving so many storms. In the small tin-roofed home tucked away in St. Roch, the smell of cornbread baking filled the kitchen. Alana tied her apron tighter, moving briskly as she poured milk into cups for 3 little ones, squabbling over who got the blue spoon. Ethan leaned down to adjust Isaiah's collar, the boy whose eyes looked eerily like his, and pressed a soft kiss to his forehead. Domestic life felt like a dream stitched together from the remnants of broken things. But beneath the warmth, one truth still lingered, like a scar, the wound from the accusation that once tried to destroy them. 1 week before the wedding, Ethan received a message from his former assistant. Attached was a leaked security video from Grant Corp's boardroom, recorded days before the scandal that had cost him everything. In the footage, Ethan was seen firmly rejecting Cassandra's demand that the company handle Alana, the nameless nurse, as she called her, unworthy of his attention. Ethan not only refused, but went further, ordering legal protection for Alana against any harassment. The video ended on Ethan's voice, calm but sharp as steel. "If you touch her or those children, I'll sue you for defamation, no matter what it costs me." It lasted less than 2 minutes, but it was the missing piece Alana had never known existed. She sat in front of the laptop, hands trembling as she watched it over and over. Something in her, the part that had once believed then broken, slowly began to mend. The next day they went to court, not to sue, but for the final hearing that would remove the slander Cassandra had buried Alana under years ago. Ethan's legal team presented their case medical records proving Alana had treated Ethan without knowing his identity. Anonymous threats traced back to a PR staffer at Grant Corp who had since confessed now that the company had changed hands. And most crucially, the testimony of Alana's grandmother, Etta, rang like a quiet bell that cleared the air. She stepped into the courtroom wearing a cream shawl, silver hair neatly pinned. Her voice was steady, the kind of calm born from a life that had weathered many storms. I raised Alana after she lost her parents, she began. She was the first child I ever saw who, even when the world turned its back on her, still apologized when she broke a cup. She paused, surveying the room, then continued. You think someone like that would manipulate others for fame or fortune? If anyone owes anything in this story, it's us for staying silent while a single mother raised 3 children with no help, no complaint, and no one to speak for her. Silence filled the courtroom. The judge nodded, struck the gavel. The verdict: Alana was fully exonerated, her record cleared, her name restored. On the way home, Ethan held Alana's hand. Neither of them spoke, but inside they both felt the dust of years being swept away. At a red light near Jackson Square, Alana glanced out the window. A group of high schoolers ran across the street, laughter rising like wind chimes breaking the stillness of the city. She turned to Ethan. I used to think you'd hate me, she said softly. Because of the past, because of the kids, because I never said anything. Ethan squeezed her hand. I never hated you, he said. I just hated myself for coming too late. Their eyes met, not fiery, not dramatic, just the quiet look of 2 people who had once died inside for each other and now were learning how to live again. That night, when all was still, Ethan took out a folded piece of paper from his worn wallet, the paternity test he had never shown Alana. He handed it to her. She glanced at it, then folded it back and set it on the table. You're not going to read it, he asked gently. No, she replied. Because whatever it says, you're their father. From the way they look at you, from your hands, your voice, the way you kiss them goodnight. Silence. Then she lifted her gaze to his. And if they're going to have a father who was once misunderstood by the world, then I want them to grow up brave enough to love someone even without proof. That wasn't just acceptance spoken aloud. It was a yes from the heart. Ethan pulled her into his arms, no longer the man who once had billions, nor the one who had fallen, but simply a man who had finally figured out how to stay. A light morning rain was falling over Garden District, the kind of rain that didn't send people running for cover, just quietly touched your shoulders and melted into your skin like a whisper. Inside a red brick house at the end of an oak-shaded street, laughter from children floated between the sound of water running in the sink and the soft jingle of an ice cream truck across the road. Alana bent down to tie Amari's shoelaces when Ethan appeared behind her, holding a steaming cup of coffee. He said nothing, just sat beside her and rested his head on her shoulder. Her hair smelled of licorice and lavender, a scent he'd carried with him for 5 years while she was gone. Gentleman. They had married the week before in a small backyard ceremony at Grandma Etta's house, the same place that had once held so many lonely Christmases for Alana, now lit up with candles, clinking glasses, and warm-hearted toasts that needed no fanfare. There was no extravagant dress, no orchestral music. Alana wore a simple white linen gown and the old canvas shoes she'd worn during her last shift at the hospital. Ethan wore the same suit from the shareholder meeting where his company had crumbled, a quiet gesture of closure, of starting over. The children played the bridal party. Amari carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Isaiah shyly read his blessing off a crumpled note, and Ellis shouted, I do, on Ethan's behalf, when the pastor asked the final question. Everyone burst into laughter. And just like that, they were a family. No need to prove it. No need for perfection. That morning, after dropping the kids off at school, Alana returned to the dining table where Ethan was spreading out design sketches. Not for tech projects or financial ventures, but for a new community health center they were building together in Bywater, a neighborhood with one of the city's highest infant mortality rates. Alana took a sip of her coffee and glanced at the plans. Remember what I told you once? She asked, her lips curling into a soft smile. About what? Pinatunurin. About dreaming of a place where people didn't need insurance to be treated equally. Ethan nodded. You said if no one built it, you would even with nothing. I remember. She picked up a pen and crossed out a line on the sketch. Well, I'm not starting with nothing anymore. That afternoon the kids came home walking under a drizzle coat, soaked, but eyes gleaming with joy. Ilana ran outside, arms open wide, catching them mid-giggle as they splashed through puddles on the cobblestone path. Ethan stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, watching them, chest tightening with quiet wonder. He had once lived in skyscrapers, heard applause after every keynote, signed multi-million-dollar deals. But he had never seen anything as beautiful as Ilana wiping raindrops from Isaiah's forehead or wrapping all three children in her arms like she was holding the whole world. That evening, the house smelled of chicken soup and garlic toast. They all sat around the table, flipping through wedding photos now pinned to the wall. "Daddy, why isn't Mommy smiling in this one?" Ellis pointed at a photo of Ilana looking at Ethan, her expression hesitant. Ethan laughed. "Because she was afraid I'd get cold feet and run away." Ilana giggled, swatting him lightly. "I wasn't afraid of you. I was afraid to believe it was real." Ethan reached under the table and squeezed her hand gently. "It is. Every bit of it, it's real." Lam. That night, after tucking the kids into bed, Ilana curled up against Ethan on the couch by the window. The rain was still tapping lightly outside. "Do you think we deserve all of this?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Ethan paused. "Not because we deserve it," he said, "but because we didn't give up even when no one believed in us. I think that's why God gave it back." She closed her eyes. Sleep came over her like a soft wool blanket. A home not because of walls or shingles, but because someone stood in the rain with you, because little hands reached for you in the dark, because your eyes met and needed no explanation. A real home, at last they had one. The sun broke through after nearly 3 days of steady rain. Drops still clung to the tips of leaves, glinting in the morning light, like tiny shards of glass placed by an invisible hand. On the old wooden swing in the backyard, Ethan sat beside Ilana, fingers intertwined, silent but whole. Inside the red brick house behind them, the kids were busy building castles out of empty milk cartons and couch pillows. A Sunday morning that seemed ordinary, but for them, this was a day unlike any other. Sa-year-e. Ilana gently placed her hand on her belly where a new heartbeat was growing steady and strong. No words were needed. Ethan's gaze already rested there, tender and knowing. "I think we should name the baby Grace," she whispered. Ethan smiled and brushed a hand through her curls. "Grace, a blessing. Because this child is something we never dared to ask for, but were given anyway." She turned to him, eyes shimmering not from tears, but from the quiet radiance of a life finally lived in truth. "Only one, sure, ma'am." This was her second pregnancy, but the first time she didn't have to worry about hospital bills or hide it from neighbors or find her way alone through quiet clinic visits. She had Ethan. She had a home. She had 3 children excited to become big brothers and sister. She had Grandma Etta, now fully moved in from Wisconsin and running a little bakery right next door to the new community health center they just opened. And she had faith again, something that had once felt too expensive to carry lost between years of abandonment, betrayal, and silence. That morning they walked together to the nearby park. Pigeons fluttered at the children's feet. Isaiah, the boy who once cried through the night Ethan arrived, now held his father's hand, like it was the hand he'd imagined 1,000 times. Ellis ran in circles, asking repeatedly whether the baby would like ice cream. And Amari whispered softly into her mother's ear, "You know what, Mom, that baby's really lucky. Because they get to start life inside your heart. I had to go all the way around the world to find mine." Ilana froze. She didn't answer, just bent down and held her daughter close. No bloodline, no biology. Love, when it is real, flows the same from one heart into another. Sunawan. That afternoon, the whole family helped repaint the living room. Ethan wrote a quote on the wall from the book Ilana had once left behind in that cabin, the last artifact that had connected them after the accident. "Some people come into our lives as blessings, others as lessons, but a few are grace itself." Ilana read the line aloud, then stood still for a moment. "You know," she said, eyes still on the words, "if I hadn't walked down that road that day, hadn't heard the crash, hadn't seen the bloody face of a stranger, we might be living in 2 worlds that would have never touched." Ethan nodded. "And if you hadn't walked away after saving me, I might never have learned how to search for what's truly worth keeping." They smiled at each other. Between them, there were no more ifs, only because. Because they had hurt. Because they had lost. Because they had believed even when there was nothing left to believe in. So that night, the house glowed with golden warmth. Ilana lay in bed with all 3 children, telling the story of how she met their father in the rain, amidst mud and panic. "Weren't you scared?" Ellis asked. "Was Daddy ugly back then?" Isaiah added with a grin. But Amari only whispered, "Did you love him already, Mommy?" Alana chuckled, turning her head toward the doorway, where Ethan stood quietly against the frame. "Not yet," she said. "But I knew. If anyone was worth loving even once in a lifetime, it would be him." The new child Grace had not yet been born, but her presence already lived in every glance, every touch, every little story, woven into the fabric of the Callahan family. A child not from plans, not from shared blood like the others. A child of grace, a forgiveness, a gift born from pain that had been endured. A reminder that life, no matter how battered, can bloom again if we never stop believing in love. Dear friend, okay. If you've journeyed with Ethan and Alana through all 15 parts from a rainy roadside rescue to the moment they name the child not yet born, I thank you with all my heart. And if your heart ever stirred during any part of this story, feel free to leave a comment below. Share your thoughts or simply drop a to say that you still believe in love, in redemption, in second chances. And don't forget to subscribe so we can meet again in the next story, where every person deserves to be loved, to be seen, and to be forgiven. Thank you, quiet, sincere companion. We will meet again.